Hey, cool kids. Welcome back into the Cool Grandpa podcast. This week's guest is Neil Taft. Now, Neil has a new book out as well as his branding called Caring Grandparents. Now, the website, of course, is caringgrandparents.com. And Neil is going to share with us his insights about becoming and being a caring grandfather. You are going to want to check out Neil's website. He's got a ton of resources, some of which that we talk about in the podcast. But I want you to make sure that you go over to caringgrandparents.com. Check out the blogs. I've offered up a few guest blogs on his website. I've created a Caring Grandparents handout that's really a prompt for us to check in with ourselves, check in with our grandchildren, and check in with our adult children. Make sure that we're building and strengthening those relationships. Now, this is a free handout and a bonus for all the listeners to this podcast. So be sure to check out the show notes. Go over to cool-grandpa.us, look for the resources and the links for this episode, and you'll be sure to find that checklist. So without further ado, let's jump into this conversation with Neil. Hi, Neil. Welcome back into the Cool Grandpa podcast. I'm excited to have you back on.
Thanks. It's great to be back.
Now, I was checking out my website to find out when we last had you, and it was almost just about a year ago exactly. I think our episode, the last one we did together, came out September 26th in 2024. So we're about due to get an update on what's going on with you.
Well, there's been a lot. There has been a tremendous amount.
Now, I think last time we had you on, we were going and talking about the Good to Great grandparenting book. And I know as part of this, we've also, or you've expanded the brand into Caring Grandparents. And I wanted to get your ideas in why you started that Caring Grandparents when you had a couple of other books that were out there.
Well, actually, this is the fourth book. The Caring Grandparents is the fourth book that I put out. We've decided to brand on Caring Grandparents because that's my website, caringgrandparents.com. It's got about 450 articles on it, and it's where we transact business, if you will. Good to Great was a good title, good information, good stories, but it wasn't comprehensive. So in Caring Grandparents, I decided to do two things. One is I deal with what I say is caring about grandchildren, and that's the first half of the book. The other is caring for grandchildren. There's like 2.5 million households in the United States that are raising their grandchildren, or grandparents raising their grandchildren. So I wanted to deal with that segment to give them some resources, stories, etc., because it's unfortunately, if that occurs in a family, it devastates the retirement, it devastates the whole lifestyle of an adult senior because they have to move out of communities, because they can't have children there, etc., etc. Economically, found out it takes $250,000 to raise a child from 1 year old to 18 without college. Economically, they sell off the RV, et cetera, et cetera. So I wanted to include that second segment in that. The first part is an extension of Good to Great in that there was some more research that I have done in Caring Grandparents, new stories, things like that.
Oh, great. Well, and I can tell you too, just to tack on a little bit, that I'm seeing now that I'm working as a special ed teacher, that especially within a special ed community, a lot of grandparents are involved, and it puts a lot of stress on those relationships, partly because grandparents, to your point, weren't expecting to be raising children. And then on top of that, you throw in some of the family traumas and some of the other things that go on. It puts a big stressor on those grandparents. So hats off to grandparents, no matter what they're doing, when they're helping to raise grandchildren.
Absolutely. I call them grand heroes because they are. They have to go back to parenting, which is a different skill than you use in grandparenting. And the other thing is, very many of the kids come with such baggage of abandonment issues and anger and behavioral issues. And you're very much aware of the behavioral issues. Well, grandparents are just aren't quite equipped for that. Like you say, it usually comes very suddenly. It comes from an incarceration, an addiction, an overdose, a death, uh, the court systems taking children away. So that they're kids that have really been harmed. They have tremendous trauma. So that makes raising them a lot harder than it would in a normal family situation.
Absolutely. It's important that we also be able to provide a little bit of hope that that grandparent is not the only one going through what they're going through. It's their story, of course, is unique, but there are resources, there's other people going through it, there's networks out there. And so I think the caring grandparents really adds a layer of maybe not comfort, but at least knowledge that that individual or that couple are not alone in what they're going through.
Yeah, there are Generations United has a lot of resources, but they also deal with trying to keep families together. There's a time in my first two books, there was a time when the court system did not consider grandparents as a good, viable option. Everybody was going toward foster children and all this kind of stuff. Well, we all know that the foster system disintegrated, and now they do consider keeping the family as a cohesive unit only because it is about the only hope for these traumatized children to get some normalcy, to get some idea. That's why the term caring grandparents, which I've had for 20 years, this is really a caring grandparent that's willing to go into this.
Absolutely. And I think too that it's important that we start to recognize what's going on. I know from my own perspective, going through some of the research with Generations United, as well as the experiences, it's just made me more aware when I'm going out, even to the grocery store, and I happen to see grandparents and grandchildren out there. And sometimes I wonder exactly about that situation. And so it's just making me a little bit more aware of some of the challenges that are going on. And maybe not every time grandpa and grandson or granddaughter are out, that it's a fun outing versus a daily experience of part of raising that grandchild.
Oh, it changes the dynamic phenomenally because now there's a discipline factor that us grandparents don't normally have to enter into. But this is daily. I mean, and this is also the healing of the traumas that the kids have had. This is a giving up of the dreams the grandparents had. I mean, it's just packed with tremendous emotions and tremendous amount of differences in expectations and what's actually happening. So every time I see that, I'll usually stop and talk to the grandparents about it if they're willing to talk because they need reinforcement. They need people. And one of the things I tell grandparents in general is if your fellow grandparents fall into this category, we have a gentleman in my Toastmasters club who his son overdosed. The mother had left. That was one trauma. The son overdosed. Trauma number two. He brings his 10-year-old granddaughter with him to Toastmasters because that's the only positive atmosphere she's in. At school, she's treated as a pariah, if you will. You don't have parents. Your grandpa comes and picks you up, that kind of thing. And kids don't mean it, but it's pretty cruel. So one of the things that Generations United does, they kind of heal that whole thing. They help the parents out. They provide a lot of support groups and or hotlines, etc., to help the grandparents do that. So I've really admired Generations United for a long time.
Sure. And That's one of the things too that I wanted to call out about your website that people, if they haven't visited, you have an extensive list of resources there. Why don't we have you go through some of the resources that you have? They're not just, fun, cutesy articles, but it's actual resources. If you're hearing this and you need some assistance, go over to this website, check out the resources that Neil has carefully put together.
Some of the key things that I've run across, we both have a mutual friend, as you know, Dr. Carrie Byrne, who deals with long distance grandparenting. Well, that's a whole nother ball of wax. I mean, that's a whole nother thing. And with geography changing, whereas kids move away more often now, they have to deal with their grandkids internationally and all that. Dr. Carrie Byrne with long distance grandparenting is one of my friends and or yours, and she also provides a need because there's people don't understand grandparents have a lot of grief around that whole thing. They're already kind of walking on eggshells because of social changes that have happened with some distance and some alienation issues and all that stuff. So there's a tremendous amount of grief around that. So Carrie's the person that sort of covers that area. She's excellent and she's research based. She doesn't just make it up. She knows what she's talking about. Also, our friend Aaron with Grandparents Academy has a tremendous amount of master classes, and the master classes there help grandparents. One of the things I noticed, Greg, is in grandparenting, there's such a spectrum of issues, even within families. Some families are cohesive, but yet one or two of the kids have gotten into trouble, gone through a divorce, done this, done that, and then that becomes an extension of the family. And the odds are that every family has some function of an extended family that is out in left field. And that's when it becomes very complicated. So I think that Erin does the best job of that with Grandparents Academy. We also, one of the people you've had on, Ted Page, I've read his great book, Good Grandpa, really tells stories of various people that where grandfathers stay involved. And that's not the norm. I think 90% of the grandparenting is basically done by grandmas. So the 10% of us that are out here trying to support other grandpas, not that they're being bad grandpas, some of them just stand back. I tell a story in my book about that in Caring Grandparents when my stepdaughter had her first baby. My wife and I went to the hospital and she was premature. So it was kind of a surprise. So we traveled to the hospital. My wife goes in with her daughter and everything else. And her daughter and I have been close and all that. And her daughter says, Neil, do you want to hold the baby? Here's this 3.5 pound little body that goes from here to here. Now, I've worked on 747 airplanes. I've run out in front of race cars at Daytona International Speedway. I said, no, it scared me to death. I was afraid I was going to break that little thing. So, but the whole point is that grandparents have such a spectrum of involvement, but yet they all feel like they're doing it alone. I felt like I was the only guy that I know that ever dealt with a little preemie baby. And I find out later on I'm not. But that's what those of us in the grandparenting space have to keep putting out there. Stories of, I call them success and or failure stories because both of them teach us quite a bit. And they're real people that have really gone through all of this stuff. That's primarily the reason why I pivoted to caring grandparents. It says more about what we're doing. Now, good to great grandparenting is a journey, but caring grandparents is an attitude. So that's why I
Oh,
decided to brand that way.
I love that. And one of the resources too that we both are connected with, and just to give a shout out to James Lott Jr., who takes a
I love
great
that man.
he takes a focus that I don't think a lot of us really appreciate, and that is the young grandfather, the young grandparent, where he focuses in on those people that are becoming grandparents in their 30s and their very early 40s. Where I know for myself, I'm more towards that late 40s and on up. And so we just wanted to give a shout out to James Lott, and he's a valuable resource that I think is on your website as well.
Yeah, James was on, as you know, on the Cracker Barrel, and that was one of the most effective things I think we've ever done here. You've done a couple of them when you gather people together from various walks of life. Well, James has this plethora of experience and careers. And he's a very, very knowledgeable, heads up kind of guy. And he's one of the best grandpas because you can hear it in his stories. He's very, very involved as a grandpa. Actually has a podcast about grandparenting. So yeah, James is one of those people, and he's wide open. I love his personality.
Yeah, he really does, folks. If you haven't checked him out, his podcast is really I'm a grandparent. And so check that out because he's very open and honest about feelings and attitudes that he both experiences as well as what he's seen with younger grandparents. But Neil, I wanted to pivot over a little bit because I think fairly recently you were on another podcast with one of your Toastmasters, Rebel Roots, and you ended up, having your own viral moment there. And I'd love for you to talk to us a little bit about that.
This is the most bizarre thing that's ever happened in my 81 years. I have a friend in Toastmasters. Her and her husband own a franchising company called Clean Eats. It's all over the country, about 120 franchisees, very successful. She's 50. Her and her husband are both very successful individuals, but she gathers up the ladies that are in my community here in Wilmington together, and they empower each other. They sit around and talk about women's stuff. Well, it was only episode 23 when I was on, and she had run out of somebody to be on that week. I know that's the case. The lady before me was a psychic. She sits around with 3 or 4 other very successful young ladies in our community, and they talk about sitting too long at the traffic light, how that person on their cell phone, blah, 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 and then they go on. They're a little risque, a little edgy. They talk about things like in the gym, they hate when the guy is on the treadmill filming them while they're doing squats in the gym. That's the kind of, so I'm a fish out of water. I go in there and I love this lady and she loves me. So we sit and she's a really good interviewer. We had 27 really good minutes about what I was doing and grandparenting and all my books and everything else. And about 2/3 of the way through the interview, she asked me a question. She said, Neil, tell me, what you think is the biggest mistake that grandparents make in connecting with their grandchildren? And I took a breath and I said, well, Yvonne, I think they make 2 mistakes. The first mistake is they fail to realize that the mother of their grandchildren, be it their daughter-in-law or daughter, is the queen that sits on the throne. She has the keys to the castle. And the other point is about connecting with your grandchildren, that many grandchildren miss the idea that it's most effective to meet your grandchildren where they are, not necessarily where you want them to be. That answer was 1 minute and 11 seconds long. She took that excerpt, put it on TikTok and on Instagram. That following weekend, it started going viral. That was 5 weeks ago. To this date, it had 2 million views.
Wow.
And I have here 2,000 comments because I read every single comment, because that's what, as grandparents, we need to know what's going on with daughter-in-laws and daughters and what goes on with people that don't feel heard, seen, or valued. Well, that's what this was all about. And I know from piling through everything, they were basically mothers of young children who weren't getting a lot of love from mother-in-law or grandparents or whatever, or were dealing with it's not maliciousness, it's unspoken irritations in the family, extended family. And that's what came through. And I got a lot of, because some of them wanted me to be their father-in-law. Some of them said, preach the word. This man, he's evolved and everything else. Well, what I did was I hit a nerve. And that very idea that we need to consider the fact and honor the parents. I think I've told you before, I have an 11th commandment just for grandparents. Thou shalt honor the parents of your grandchildren. That is the most effective way. You don't have to be somebody else you're not. You don't have to do anything else, but you don't impose your way of doing things into somebody else that you place 100% responsible for their babies. They're their children, not yours. And as a grandparent, sometimes you've got to step back. That's a hard thing to do. I do think grandfathers do it better than grandmothers. I do. But that was my viral moment. I probably am going to try to duplicate it because I think it's a lesson. I will go on to anybody's podcast. I don't care if it's young mothers that want to shoot arrows at me about being a grandparent doesn't understand and all that stuff, because I'm not that person, but I understand they're not feeling heard.
So, what do you think it is that causes us to, when we transition from that parent into a grandparent, that we maybe forget what it was like to be that young parent, and we either step too far back or we come in too hard into that relationship when a grandchild enters the family?
I don't think intention's enough. I think you have to add to intention education. You have to add to it the value. You have to stop and consider as a grandparent, you raise this child, and if you raise them correctly and successfully, you raise them to be independent and to be responsible for themselves. I think we hang on to a thread of that, and we hang on to wanting to say, well, I did it this way, or I did a good job with you, so why wouldn't you do that with your children? All those little things, and particularly between grandmothers, mother-in-laws, and the mothers of the children, it can be. Dee Dee Moore says this real well. Even a suggestion can be misconstrued by a tired, scared 19-year-old first-time mother. Well, we had cloth diapers. Well, you can think that and you can find another way to say it, but when you say it that way, you're diminishing the mother, usually at a time of vulnerability, fatigue, and everything else. So I think we don't, as grandparents, we just kind of take assumptions. I think I told you last time I was on that Jack Canfield asked me one time, what do you think the biggest myth in grandparenting is? And I said, Jack, it's that grandparents think grandparenting is like falling off a log. It's natural. It's not natural. We're dealing with human beings. We didn't have a lot of say in choosing. So I think that's, and it's not malicious. It's not, most times it's not malicious. The intent's not there. It's just that intention is just not enough. You've got to learn a lot of things. And it's more how you say it and when you say it than what you say.
Oh, that's great. That's great advice. What do you think in some of your discussions in your research that you find, in knowing everybody's different, but what's a common stressor that either young moms or young dads, young couples are facing that maybe grandparents aren't sensitive or maybe don't know?
I think the grandparents forget how insecure they were when their first child came along, because a lot of this is insecurity. Now, you've had some guests on that there's some, it blows my mind why women would have children, because after childbirth, there's so many things go on, including postpartum depression, etc. Stepdaughter who went through that tremendously. One of the most caring, giving, loving, as a matter of fact, she's a minister right today. beautiful soul. But she went through this thing that happened to her more chemically than anything. So while she's going through that, rushes people that they want to be part of the show. They want a photo op with a baby. They misguided intention says, I want to bond with your baby. Well, the mother hadn't had a chance to bond yet. So it's more, again, it's not bad intention. It's just not remembering what it was like when they were a young couple and had their first child, or even their second or third. My oldest sister, her daughter had 4 children, 3 boys, and then Olivia, my sweet, sweet, sweet niece. And when she had her fourth one, she had studied, very good parent, and she told her mom, she said, Mom, you know, no offense, but I just want my husband in the room. We want to bond with our baby. We want this to be special. This is our last one we're going to have. And her mom got her feelings hurt. Now, if you knew my oldest sister, very loving, beautiful, I think she's probably Mother Teresa in the modern era because she's very considerate. She was even a psychologist. She should understand all that, but it kind of hurt her feelings. Well, that's because that's the way it'd been done. Well, we can't impose that on other people. So it's scary for women each time they have children.
Yeah. And, the theme that I hear a lot, even in this conversation, is the assumptions and even not the clear communications. And I think sometimes we're scared of that being direct, especially if it's a daughter in law or a son in law, because it's probably that relationship is not as deep as maybe we would like. And having that directness as far as, do you want us there? When do you want us to come and visit with the new baby? What do you need? Some of those things may be a little bit uncomfortable, but it sounds like those are the conversations that grandparents need to have that leadership within that family, if I'm hearing correctly.
You're absolutely right. If we ask what it is we can do and when we can do it way ahead of time, I have a saying, life is complicated. Family life is a multiple of complicated, and extended family life is exponentially complicated. However, when we label it complicated, it's kind of like saying, I don't want to talk about it. And complexity is really a hard thing, especially in extended families. You've got all these other things going on, and even families have trouble communicating a lot of times. Well, this is an extended family. This is that little bit once removed, and all the things. We have a young couple that are trying to figure out how to get along with each other. Then we throw in this newborn miracle, and then we throw in 4 grandparents that want to be there because they think it's loving to want to be there. Well, it may be loving, but it's not very considerate. And consideration is the one thing that I think is the ingredient we're missing. Yes, it would be nice to have conversations. It takes a real strong person to do that. But, and I'm going to go back again. I know more grandpas that ask those questions than grandmas. I mean, it just is part of the process. And so it is. A good conversation ahead of time heads all this stuff off. Resentment is cumulative. So that little misstep back when your son brought home that young lady and she had tattoos or blue hair or whatever it was, and somehow or another she sensed you didn't like that, that carries all the way to that first grandchild. And unless somebody brings it up and deals with it or sits down and says, now that you're part of the family, is there any blind sides I had up till this point in time? Can we find a way to bury any hatchets or do whatever? That's a hard conversation. So it is accumulation of a lot of those things.
Agreed. And I think too that it's tricky, I think, on those fronts because you're worried about offending somebody or pushing them away. And especially now where we see so many grandparents becoming estranged from their children as well as the in-laws, and that cutoff from having that communication and access even with the grandchildren. It becomes a very tight rope to walk on, but I think you have to also challenge those assumptions that you have and that fear that you have to get that communication going. Because one way or another, it's either going to improve or you're going to find out quickly that you need to take steps together to improve a relationship.
And the further we go down that river, the harder it is to get back up. I think you're a
Absolutely.
kayaker, aren't you?
I
Okay.
am. At least I purport to be.
Well, my only experience is I spent 8 hours in a kayak coming down the Black River here in eastern North Carolina. My arms fell off. But the further down you get stream, the harder. So these are conversations if we can convince people. Somebody asked me the other day about new grandparents, and I said, I would love to get all the new grandparents in a room and share what I know from all the people I've talked to, because then you're upstream. There was a youth, when I was a youth minister, we had a conference one day, and they were talking about young people that get into trouble, drugs, et cetera, et cetera. And the conference leader said, what happens is that you've got little young people jumping off a bridge and they go downstream, and to keep them from drowning, somebody downstream swims out, gets them, and falls on shore. Where's the media going to go? They don't go to the bridge, they go down to the hero saving the person. Well, that's downstream. What if we went back to the bridge and talked them off the ledge? That's the same thing that happens in families, much less extended families. So, yeah, I'm a proponent of having those discussions every time I go to my son. Now, I have a 20-year-old, 19-year-old, and 16-year-old in the same household, three of my grandchildren. And I asked my son and my daughter in law, what are we working on now? Are we on electronics or off electronics? Are we drinking Coke or are we drinking water? What are the parameters with which, because if you guys go off and I stay with them this evening, they're going to play me like a banjo. So I don't want that to happen. And my son says to me, he says, Dad, we know your heart's in the right place, whatever decisions you make. I said, yeah, but I don't want to undo anything you're doing. Well, that's my attitude toward that family. That's because we've had conversations. When my granddaughter was, I don't know if you remember one of the first pictures I have. I had my little granddaughter, 5 years old. She's now 20 and beautiful. But we're at the pool together. Well, back then it was easier to have those conversations, and they were more meaningful. My ex daughter in law and I have the greatest respect for each other. That's why my 20-year-old granddaughter is still in my life.
Hmm.
It is a matter of having those conversations, and it's a matter of backing them up as far as you can. And my wife and I went to marriage counseling before we got married. Smartest thing we ever did, because it headed off some of those misunderstandings, assumptions, or whatever comes into this. Doesn't make it perfect, but it sure makes it a lot more meaningful. And extended families, that would be meaningful.
Absolutely. And those are great words of wisdom that you're sharing with us. Neil, I wanted to pivot over a little bit and maybe I know you're doing a TEDx talk coming up in Wilmington, but maybe you could share just a theme or something about that TEDx talk that you're getting ready to present.
Yeah, it's going to be May 15th. It scares me, to be honest with you, but six of us from our Toastmasters Club formed a TEDx organization local. And we will be there, and then there'll be another 9 people from the community. But what scares me is there's 3 PhDs that want to present at this. Apparently, if you're on the tenure track, a TEDx talk is a big badge to put on. So I get a little intimidated with all this stuff. But my talk is basically that there are 2 things we can do. One of the things we can do is recognize the parents of the grandchildren. That is to partner with them. And that's not easy because we want to be right. We know 81 years old, I know what's right. And we tend to lose it when we try to express that need to be right. The other thing is, I talk a lot about affirmation, and it changes. You have to have a mindset change to do that. You have to have empathy and compassion. You have to look past all the externals. You have to consider, what as Tony Robbins says, what else could be happening in their lives. If you approach most meaningful relationships with that, is you're going to get deeper. And that's what my talk's about. It's talking about just backing up a little bit and considering. I have a really corny saying that I say to people that will listen. I think you should be a good seer and a good sayer. It kind of covers it all. Because if you're looking for the positive, all the little negative things of the tattoos, blue hair, or whatever that might be, the nose rings, etc., that doesn't bother you as much if you're looking for the good things. And to be a good sayer, you need to change your perspective. You need to understand that there may be something else going on in our lives. Just assume. I tell anybody to listen, assume everybody you meet has a broken heart, because they do. And if you approach everybody in your extended family that way, rather than bowling in and telling them how to do it or saying that was dumb or something like that. So that's the crux of my TED Talk, is to have back up, look at some things. It's not easy. I have a great quote in there. You remember Ray Charles, the singer?
Yes, I do.
He was visually challenged, blind, if you will. So this is an interesting quote that he said. He said, there's nowhere in the Old Testament or the New Testament that says it's easy. It says, just because you believe in me, don't mean you got no troubles. I love that saying. It's just assume that things are happening in people's lives, and it allows us to. So that's basically what my TED Talk's about, is to give people grace, give them some room. And it's so true with our grandchildren and the parents of our grandchildren.
I love it. The episode that we had over a year ago is titled Good Seer, Good Sayer. And I'm sure to put those links to that episode into this podcast episode. So I encourage people to go back and listen to that. So we really did a deep dive on that philosophy, which is just incredible. But Neil, I've had you on for a little bit now. Is there anything about caring grandparents or grandparenting in general that I haven't asked you or we haven't hit on that you would love to bring up with us?
Really, not much I can think of. You've been very effective, and basically the principles all apply. The one thing I want to leave the listeners with is the idea of being a good seer and a good sayer is just as good for us as it is for the person that we're dealing with. You can't give this stuff away. And that's what I teach my grandchildren. That's what I teach my children. That's what I try to tell everybody. Rather than looking for the dark side, the human nature causes this. If a picture's crooked, out of the whole gallery, one's crooked, everybody concentrates on the crooked one, as opposed to standing in front of Monet or something like that and appreciating it. And that's what the good saying is. If you're over here doing this, the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu, Archbishop Tutu, got together and collaborated for a week and wrote a book. There was journalists with him. He wrote a book. It's called The Book of Joy. And he says, if you live your life looking for the good in other people, that's called nirvana. You stay in that head place. And that's my good saying idea. And it's true with everything we talk about, all the nuts and bolts about daughter-in-laws, mother-in-laws, and everything. If they would just back up and start with that affirmation, is a powerful thing. And if you find a way to affirm somebody, everything you can say after that. What is it in business we learned? If you're going to criticize somebody, sandwich it with an affirmation, criticism, affirmation. It's all. ain't rocket science.
No, and even with that criticism, it tends to be too, what can you do to fix it?
That's right.
Because if you can't do anything about it, it's almost not even worth bringing up.
That's and we do a lot of wishing. You know, I wish people were this way. Well, I don't know about you. I got a lot of work to do on me before I can be wishing somebody else's a different ways. Yeah, that's. But you've been very effective at digging into this, and that's been what for 20 years now. I've been teaching. It's in these books. I am starting on a fifth book.
Okay. What's that going to be? You're teasing us a little bit here.
I am teasing you. It's basically the result of us finding out more. I guess I want to tell grandparents we have some empirical data. My viral moment that I'm going to repeat and repeat and repeat is going to tell us a lot of things about what they're actually thinking as daughter-in-laws and parents of our grandchildren. And that's where my research is going now. My research before was what's a grandparent doing and what's the grandparent that's raising their grandchildren doing. But now my research is to find out what's going on the other side so I can bridge, if you will. And part of what I'm playing with is a mutually beneficial bridge because it benefits the family. Unfortunately, somebody already got focus on the family, so I'm going to do another way of running at that. But everything we do with our grandchildren and the parents of their grandchildren, it strengthens family. And I am a strong believer in family. So that's where I'm going with my next book. No working titles yet, but I'll be on that one pretty soon.
Well, good. Well, we look forward to having you back on to talk about what you found and what pearls of wisdom you'll have for us.
Fabulous. I appreciate you more than you know.
Well, thank you. And Neil, once more, where is the best way for people to find you, to get in contact with you, to track down these viral moments that you've had?
Perfect branding. Caringgrandparents.
Awesome. And everything is right there, folks. Like I
Yes.
said, there's resources, there's guest blogs, there's all sorts of things right there on the website. Neil makes it super easy for us.
One of the things that we added to ours this past year is we have guest blogs because I've been running my mouth for a long time, but I want other people to come in with their perception. And you have been kind enough to do a few of them. Papa James L. Lott has done some too. And it puts a new flavor in there. So, yeah, it's got a lot on it.
It does. Well, and you're very generous to allow us to do that because he and I in particular are doing the podcast and that's one form of expression and a way to get a message out. But another way is to be a little bit more thoughtful and deliberate when you actually do a written word. And you're very generous to give us an outlet for that. So thank you.
Does my heart good to have you on.
Awesome. Well, Neil, I'm going to let you go. This has been absolutely fantastic. And, you've lit a fire under me that maybe we need to get another little Cracker Barrel together with some folks.
I would like to see us have a Cracker Barrel that includes some grandmas also.
Okay.
There's a
Okay.
thought.
That would be good. I'd love to have that. So, but Neil, I really do appreciate you being on the Cool Grandpa podcast and, just all the best with the caring grandparents and with your TEDx talk coming up soon.
Wish me luck. Good. Thank you.
I had a great time having Neil on the podcast again. I want to remind you, though, before we wrap everything up, go over to the show notes for this episode, find your Caring Grandparents Connection Pack. Make sure you download that and check that out. I think this is a great resource based on the wisdom that Neil has shared with us that you can implement today to check in with yourself, your grandchildren, and your adult children to really strengthen those relationships that you have. I also want to remind you too, please be sure to like and subscribe to this podcast or the YouTube channel if you happen to be watching this. That's a great way that we can help grow the audience and we can share the messaging about how important and influential grandparents can be in the lives of not just the grandchildren, but the community that we live in as well. So until next time, remember to stay cool.